there is a process by which we can start to see through the sense of being an individual, the sense of being a doer, the sense of being a thinker of our own thoughts, author of our own actions. There's no free will. But relatively, whilst we consider ourselves to be a body-mind entity, whilst ignorance is in operation, there is free will on a pragmatic point of view, or at least we appear to have free will. Ultimately, these teachings are about reducing suffering and ending suffering. Non-duality is a place or a state where there is no suffering. The mind can think of oneness as like, oh, there are lots of things here, but there's a oneness that runs through them all. So in that sense, there are many, but there's also just one. But the true non-duality, it cannot even be explained like this. It's beyond our ability to comprehend with the mind. When you truly empower people, the ego starts to fall away. The fragile sense of egoic self starts to fall away naturally. We start to feel happier.
Today we have with us Tom Das, a spiritual teacher and medical doctor who brings immense clarity to the complex teachings of non-duality. Tom's journey has spanned Advaita Vedanta, various schools of Buddhism, meditation, and beyond. What truly stands out is the simple, direct way in which he invites us to recognize our true nature and put an end to suffering. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Tom, to begin this conversation, can you describe the essence of non-duality and its implications in day-to-day life?
Wow, good question. Straight there. So I can try to describe the essence of non-duality, but I can't really. It is something we all know, actually. It's all already, all the knowledge we need is within us already. So in one sense, I don't need to be able to describe it because you already know it deep within you. The deepest part of you knows the truth, the non-dual truth, or the truth, which happens to be non-dual, non-duality. So that's quite good news, really, that we don't have to fully describe it. We can describe it in negative terms, what it isn't. Which is not the same as describing what it is, but it can be helpful. And ultimately, these teachings are about reducing suffering and ending suffering. So non-duality is a place or a state, and it isn't actually a place or a state, but these are just some words, where there is no suffering. So it's a pretty radical thing, really. I don't know about you, but most of us are taught that suffering is an integral part of life, of living. It's a part of what it is to be a human being. And it can help, as well as cause us pain, it can also help us grow. And it's a part of life, and we should accept that. But for many thousands of years, across all types of cultures and traditions, across various different places, different continents, there have been teachings that have emerged. Spontaneously, we could say, spontaneously emerged. And these teachings proclaim there is a way to end suffering. Whether this is called nirvana, or self-realization, or heaven, or God realization, or awakening, or whatever, there there have been teachings that say there is a way to go beyond suffering. And more than this, they say it's not just about ending suffering, it's about discovering something that is true. Now, just because something is true doesn't mean it will end suffering. Sometimes the truth can be quite horrible, you know. It can be something quite undesirable, but it's true, and that can cause suffering. But these teachings and the teachings that I share, not only can they be realized directly yourself, you don't need any external authority or belief or anything, but we discover something that is directly accessible. You don't need any books or special equipment or special apparatus. It is true, and it ends suffering. So it almost sounds too good to be true, but it isn't. It is true.
I wanted to further dive into talking about suffering. You speak about suffering as resistance. Could you explain how suffering dissolves when we stop resisting what is?
Yeah. So there are different levels of the teaching. So when we first come to the teaching, most people, when they first come to a spiritual teaching, they think of themselves as a human being. And that means you're born at a certain time in a certain place, into a certain family, into a certain culture or society. And maybe you hear about some kind of spiritual thing, whatever that is, or religious thing. And you start to engage with it. And your basic paradigm is, I'm a person, and this spiritual teaching is going to help me in some way. You know? And as we go along our spiritual journey, hopefully, if it's a good spiritual teaching and it fits us and where we are, we start to feel happier. Now, you mentioned resistance. One of the things about resistance is that there are certain types of way we resist and we cling onto things that create psychological suffering. And with it, physical suffering. And that can cause suffering to ourselves. And it can cause suffering to others around us, other people, other animals, other beings, and the environment. All sorts of suffering, all levels of suffering. And much of this is caused by resistance, psychological resistance. Okay. And what does this mean? This essentially means not accepting as true things that are true. Yeah, if we cannot accept things that are true, that are actually true, then that is resistance. That doesn't mean we don't want to change anything, but the starting point for change is to accept where we are now. If we cannot accept where we are now, then this can lead to all kinds of unnecessary psychological suffering. So this is one level that the teachings work at, the psychological level. And the more we understand this level of teaching, the easier our lives become on a psychological level. However, there is a time to resist. You know, there are times where we have to resist. We have to say no. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about psychological resistance, which is not accepting the reality you're in. You understand the difference? Sometimes, like you may say to me, Tom, can I come into your home and take everything you own? I might have to say, no, you can't do that. Yeah, that's resistance, active resistance. But we're dealing with the reality of the physical reality of the situation we're in, that kind of thing. So there is a time to resist, but that's not, when we say ending psychological resistance, we're not saying don't have any boundaries. And boundaries are profoundly important for relationships, for society. And so we must realize that many people on a spiritual path, they just allow everything and that can be very detrimental. We need to know when to say yes, we need to know when to say no, and we need to have no psychological inner resistance if we want to be happier.
How would you explain surrender to someone who still feels very identified with the mind and body?
That's a great question. That's a great question. See, the way, there is no one way, basically. These words and these teachings, they work best when they're tailored to the individual. Because someone might hear the word surrender. Like if I say surrender to God, someone might hear that and go, oh, wonderful, I love that teaching. It just feels so right. I understand what it means. And someone else, they may say, well, I love the word surrender, but I hate the word God. That's an awful word. I don't like that word God. And someone else might say, I love the word God, but I don't like the idea of surrendering. That doesn't sound very nice to me. And then, so the way a seeker psychologically and intellectually interacts with the words of the teaching, it varies massively depending on that individual person's conditioning, where they've come from, their life experiences. So how do we explain surrender? Surrender to God, surrender to life, letting go? I mean, and someone might say, I don't want to surrender. So then the teachings work in a different way. The way I work is that I come to the person wherever they are. I meet them wherever they are. And I work with their language and their ways of thinking. And that's what I find works best. So I don't have a way of teaching that is generic, but a way of teaching naturally unfolds. And this is the traditional way too, that a teacher and a seeker together, there's a creative process that occurs spontaneously when a seeker asks a question, and that generates a response that's hopefully appropriate to the level and the context of the seeker that the seeker is in. So I haven't answered your question. I'm really aware of that. You're welcome to ask me again if you want, and maybe you'll get something out of me.
Just specifically in regards to about surrender, how would you explain surrender to someone that I mean, I think you mostly explained it, but if you can just elaborate a little bit more to someone who is unaware of that aspect because of how identified they are with the mind and body. So it's very foggy to them.
Okay. Okay. So again, we can, when you first come to teaching, as I explained before, most people will think, oh, I'm a body mind, I'm a person. I was born at a certain time or place. If I say, who are you? They'll describe characteristics related to their body mind. They might say, oh, I am this many years old, I am from this place, or I have this job, or I'm very good at playing tennis or something, which is all related to the body. And the idea of surrender is to start to let go and allow something greater than you to come into your life. Now, what do I mean by greater than you? If you consider yourself to be a body-mind entity, it's the admission or the opening up to the possibility that there is a power of some kind greater than the body, just the body-mind, that affects us. Now, we could call that power anything you want. We can call it God. We can call it specific God, like Krishna or Shiva or Jesus. Or we could call it, when I first came to the surrender type teachings, I didn't like the idea of God. I was agnostic to God. I'd said, oh, I don't know if there's a God or not. So I can't surrender to God because I don't know if there's a God. But what Tom was able to do is Tom was able to understand the concept of the universe. So what Tom used to do is he used to say, Well, let me try and surrender a bit to the universe because I can get with that. That's Tom's thinking, Tom's way of seeing the world. So he and he was reading teachings at a time that allowed him to sort of have a bit of faith or trust in something bigger than him. Because most of us will come to a point in our lives, if we've had enough life experience, where we start to realize, I can't cope with all this stuff. There's so much stuff going on. There's so many variables in my life. I can't cope with it all. So the idea of something, a power bigger than you that can help you, and then to start to slowly give over some responsibility of your life to that power. Instead of saying, I'm going to do everything myself, I'm going to do everything by myself, for myself, by myself. We say, maybe something else can help me. And it's that opening your mind, opening your heart, and opening energetically just to something bigger than you, more than you, coming into your life and helping you. And once you start to do that, it's like a positively reinforcing cycle. And if you don't do that, you get the equivalent, you get the opposite, you get a negatively reinforcing cycle. So people who aren't open to this, they will never see that greater power in their life, almost. I'm going to say never, they may still do. It can be thrust upon them. But it's, if you don't acknowledge that there's potentially something greater than you may not be sure if it's there or not. But if you're not even open to it, if you're closed-minded to it, you're energetically closed, you're intellectually closed, you're shutting that down, then most of those people will not ever feel there's a greater power in their life. But as soon as you start to open up to the possibility, intellectually, emotionally, energetically, then there's a possibility for that to come in. And it starts to show you, it starts to reveal itself to you. And this is the beginning of the path of love, or the path of surrender, or the path of, it's a divine path. Is that when we commune with God, or the divine, or however you want to, or spirit, however you want, whatever word you want to use. Is that helpful? Does that get a bit better, a bit closer to the question you're asking?
No, it really did. And thank you so much for sharing your personal experience as well. I think that's something that the audience while watching will also relate with. So yeah, thank you for that explanation. I wanted to talk about space-time from the Advaita Vedanta perspective. Are these concepts superimposed on changeless awareness? And how can one come to directly experience this timeless, spaceless world? I'd love it if you could explain this as elaborately as possible, because it's a concept that many of our viewers who have a scientific mindset, they're interested in it.
So I don't know that much about what the viewers of your channel are like, actually. So that's quite interesting. So you'd say a lot of them have got kind of a scientific type background, which is, my background is science. I was always interested in that. And I was always fascinated with religion and spirituality. But I had this kind of problem. I don't know if it's a problem or not, but I had this thing where I found it very difficult to believe anything that wasn't proved to me, So I was surrounded by some people who were religious and they were able to have faith and believe in things. I found that incredibly difficult. I was like, my mind would be, how can I believe that? I don't care who you are, even if you're a family member of mine who I love very much, and I know you love me very much, I can't believe what you believe just because you tell me to. My mind couldn't let go. It's always questioning. So if someone said you should believe in this or surrender to God, I wouldn't be able to do it, even if I wanted to, because it didn't make sense to my mind. So this was kind of my mindset back when I was a lot younger. And probably it's still the same way now. It's just that I've seen things now that I hadn't seen when I was younger. So you asked about Advaita Vedanta, the viewpoint that what we truly are. Is that the way you phrase it? What we truly are is this, or what they're how did you phrase it? This timeless, spaceless consciousness upon which all phenomena are superimposed. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I said, are these concepts superimposed on the changeless awareness and how can one come to directly experience this timeless, spaceless world?
Okay, so what's your understanding? What do you think? Am I allowed to ask you that?
It's not real. That's how I feel personally, but I would love to get your understanding on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You see, the way we express our understanding will vary according to our level of, our depth of realization, our depth of perception. And the way I express myself, it depends on who I'm talking to. Because this can all get very conceptual. It can all get very, here are the electrons, here are the protons, here are the neutrons, and that's the way an atom is. That's how an atom is composed. And it can be the same. Oh, there's awareness, it's timeless, it's spaceless, and then everything's projected onto it. That's the model. And there's a deeper kind of communication, which is not in words, actually, where the truth of Advaita Vedanta is really transmitted. It's not, the words are that it's transmitted in the words, but also something beyond the words. And it's like 2 or 3 or 4 people having a discussion about what Paris is like, and they've all been to Paris, apparently. You don't know. You're listening to 4 people talk about Paris, and you're trying to figure out who's right. But ultimately, to really know, you've got to go to Paris yourself. So there are lots of speculation, and lots of people would tell us what Paris is like. Or let's come away from that metaphor of Paris. Lots of people tell us what liberation is like, what self-realization is like, what nirvana is like. For me, these are all the same, by the way. Self-realization, liberation, nirvana. I use these words interchangeably. But so we can come up with yes, what there truly is there's this awareness, unchanging awareness, and everything else is superimposed and is illusion. But is this something we believe? Is this something we feel? Is this something we know? And what I'm really interested in is I'm very happy to explain things in words, but that's secondary importance to me. What is much more helpful from my point of view, the way I approach it, is how to help people discover the truth for themselves. So you don't have to rely on any verbal explanation, any text, any teacher. And you don't even have to rely, this is maybe a subtle point, but you don't even have to rely on the thoughts in your own head. Because sometimes we cling to thoughts to try and steer us on this path, which isn't fine and normal, but really we want to go beyond having any concepts. We want to discover something that is prior to all of this stuff. Now, when we discover that, it cannot be put into words. But the way you said it is pretty good. The way you said it is pretty good. But we'll discover even that is not quite right. Nothing we put into words is quite right. It's so much deeper and more spectacular than anything we can imagine. And simultaneously, simpler. It's simpler than anything we can understand. It's so simple, any concept is too complex. The nearest we get to is things like oneness or non-duality, which sounds quite complicated. Non-duality sounds quite technical, but it's trying to point at something so profoundly simple that it cannot be conceived of, cannot be understood by the mind. The mind can only think in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, these sorts of things. You can only think in terms of duality, polarity, multiplicity. And even when the mind thinks of one, it can only conceive of that in opposition to two or three or many. So it can't understand really what oneness is. It can think it understands what oneness is, but it cannot actually. I'll give you an example. The mind can think of oneness as like, oh, there are lots of things here, but there's a oneness that runs through them all. So in that sense, there are many, but there's also just one. This is a very commonly held view. But this is actually not the truth. The truth is much more radical and profound than that. Because we can actually put that into words quite easily. Like I've just done. I've just said, look, there are many things here, and there's a oneness that goes through. Very easy to put into words. You may agree, you may disagree, but everyone can understand the concept at least. Or, many people will be able to understand the concept of what I've just said. They may agree, they may disagree, but at least you can understand it. But the true non-duality, it cannot even be explained like this. It's beyond our ability to comprehend with the mind. There's a part of us that is not of the body, and that is not of the mind. That is what I call what scriptures call your true self, Atman, and that knows what it is without needing the mind or the body or any equipment or any superimposition to know itself. But the way you put it is fine. That's a nice way of putting it too, and I might say that sometimes too.
Is there truly a personal doer in any action in life? And if not, what is the ego? And how can one begin to see through its illusion without resisting it?
Another great question. Yeah. The thing is that in truth, there is no individual doer. And there is a process by which we can start to see through the sense of being an individual, the sense of being a doer, the sense of being a thinker of our own thoughts, or I should say the illusory sense of being a thinker of our own thoughts, the illusory sense of being the author of our own actions, or author of actions. I'm saying our own actions. Author of actions and a thinker of thoughts, a doer. We can say doer has two aspects to it. Actions, which are by the body, and thoughts or feelings, which are from the mind. And these are two aspects of being a doer. It's the psychological and the physical, we can say. When we do things psychologically, we tend to call that thinking or emoting. And when we do things physically, we tend to call that action. Now, when you start to see through this, well, typically a few things can happen. One is that for some people that can alleviate suffering massively, because we do not feel that, we start to realize that we cannot be blamed for all these things that perhaps we haven't done right, and we do not have to feel guilty, and also we cannot feel too proud about these things that we've done either. So, and that everything is happening somehow by some power greater than what we thought we were. The other thing that can happen is that it can be very frightening, because the sense of self which an individual may have built up, it starts to get eroded and potentially even destroyed, and that can be very destabilizing. So, traditionally we tend not to talk about this kind of stuff too early on because it can be very destabilizing. The other thing is that a lot of people cling on to this as an ideology. There's another thing that can happen, is that people say, well, there's no me, there's no you, and it becomes just a belief, a subtle belief in the mind. There's no doer, but they still actually feel like they're a person, still feels like they're a person, but they're just saying it, but they're parroting it almost in their brain. Maybe parroting is a bit strong because they usually have a genuine sense as well that there's nothing here, or no individual center here. And there are several different ways we can start to see into this. When I first started teaching, I used to talk about this a lot more, and I've actually drifted away from that now, because I feel like there's maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it's just a natural shift I haven't done it deliberately. There's been a natural shift in the way I share these teachings. I would say, why does it matter? Why does it matter if you're a doer or you're not a doer? Why does the question even matter? Yeah. Who is even worried about this question? Who even cares about this question? Why does it matter if there's a doer, an individual, or not? Why are you concerned? So I'd put that back to you. I don't know how you want to respond to that.
I mean, I guess it can be the question of free will, and that was something I also wanted to ask to you. That question, does free will truly exist if we are not the doer, and is consciousness, is that the only thing that is true?
Yeah. So so ultimately there is no free will, but ultimately there is no individual to have free will. So it's like asking a question about something that doesn't exist in truth. It's like, the rope and the snake analogy. Will your viewers be aware of that analogy?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like asking, does the snake prefer to go left, or does the snake prefer to go right? Well, there isn't really a snake. Does the snake have free will? Does the snake not have free will? Well, on an absolute sense, there's no snake. There's no free will. But relatively, whilst we consider ourselves to be a body-mind entity, whilst ignorance is an operation, whilst we're seeing a snake in front of us, whilst we think of ourselves as a person, there is free will on a pragmatic point of view. There is free will. We have free will because, or at least we appear to have free will. So, scientifically, there is no evidence for free will. As many neuroscientists and physical scientists and biological scientists will tell you, we haven't found any evidence of free will. But most of these people conduct their daily lives as if there is free will. So when they're talking to their friends and their family, they talk as if there is free will, and that's the way we live our lives. There's a huge problem with saying there's no free will for some spiritual seekers. Again, it can take away their sense of agency, their sense of self. Now you might say, well, that's the good thing. That's the whole point of the teaching. Take away your sense of being a doer and take away your sense of self. Well, yes and no, because this can be hugely problematic for many seekers. We need to build ourselves up. We need to build up our sense of self and sense of ego before we can start to let it go. And if you have a child, or if you're working with a child, or you're a teacher of children or something like that, you don't want to tell them, oh, look, you have no free will. You have no choice. That's not a good thing to teach a child. You want to teach them, hey, listen, you're a great kid. You're not perfect and you're going to make mistakes, but you're a great kid. You can do great things if you put your mind to it. What do you want to be when you grow up? All right, what do you like to do? Okay, and you're going to be encouraging them as if they have free will. Do you know what I mean? And you want to be empowering them, making them feel more confident about who they are, helping them develop their skills and knowledge and intuition. That's what I would say. So when I'm sharing these teachings with someone, I don't come from an ideological point of view at all. My aim is to empower them. When I say my aim, it's just a natural thing that happens. I want to empower people. And what happens is when you truly empower people, not in an arrogant, egotistical way, but when you truly empower them, you give them inner confidence, the ego starts to fall away. The fragile sense of egoic self starts to fall away naturally. We start to feel happier. When we start to feel happier, it's our true nature shining through. And when our true nature shines through, we stop clinging. You asked me earlier, how do we surrender? Once we start to feel amazing in ourselves, we start to let go. We start to let go. We feel more secure in ourselves. Not because we've got an attractive partner, or because we've got a flashy car, or because we've got, a 6 or 7 figure paycheck or something, we start to stop caring about those things so much when we feel good about ourselves, we naturally. So if you empower people in a truthful way, not in a deluded way, we don't want to tell people they're great at tennis when they suck, but when you empower people in a truthful way, and they come in and you actually bring them in line with who they really are, then naturally all the spirituality starts to naturally happen. This approach is what I've naturally started to do for many years now. It's such a beautiful approach because you don't get any of these negative aspects of people freaking out about the teachings, people having existential crises. Or if you do, it's much less. It's a loving, happy approach, and it fills your heart with fullness, and the ego naturally falls away. It's a very loving and gentle teaching, but it's also totally radical. It doesn't compromise on how radical it is. It might sound like it does, but it doesn't.
If you are empowering someone and they are letting go of the ego, and this is the reason I'm asking this, is because we do get comments of a lot of viewers that are experiencing dispassion. Like you said, that with your approach, it's not too much of a existential crisis. But still, if someone is experiencing dispassion, what would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a great one as well, because that's a really practical question. As you say, people are commenting that because it's happening. So I come across this issue a lot. People are contacting me and we have one-to-one sessions, or they're messaging me or emailing me, and I come across this issue. Again, if you have, let's say, 5 people come to you and they're experiencing this dispassion, you mentioned I'm a medical doctor, right? If 5 people come to you and they've got a cough, they may not all have the same problem. Yeah, there can be different root causes for the similar looking symptoms. So when people have come to me with dispassion, I sort of like a good physician, I kind of, where's this dispassion coming from? Often it's not the same for everyone. That's the first thing. Yeah. So sometimes it's a symptom of depression. Sometimes it's a symptom of anxiety. or anxiety disorder, avoidant disorder. Sometimes it's because they are having this sort of nihilistic existential crisis when they're saying, what's the point of anything? This kind of apathy, pointlessness. Yeah. This tends not to happen with the way I share my teachings, because the way dispassion naturally occurs in the way I share this is you start to feel happier in yourself. It comes from deep within us. Our true nature is happiness. It is one without a second. And that happiness, the more we connect with it, the more constant it becomes, until it becomes unceasing, becomes constant. Even saying constant is not right, because that implies there's time. It's timeless. But when you start to, that naturally gives rise to dispassion. Because let's say you're really interested in trying to get that Ferrari to make you happy. As you feel happier in yourself, you naturally don't want the Ferrari as much. You don't care about it so much. You might still like Ferraris, if that's your thing. But typically, you just stop caring about it. You don't care. Now, this doesn't cause a existential crisis. Why? Because you're happy. Whereas if you are unhappy and you stop caring about Ferrari, then what happens? You're left with being unhappy. You're just left as an unhappy person without any direction. You don't have a sense of direction. Now, without a sense of direction or purpose, many people don't feel happy. They don't have a sense of meaning or fulfillment. But with the way I share the teachings, when dispassion arises, it arises naturally. And it's a secondary effect of feeling fulfilled in yourself. And then you never get this question, oh, what do I do with dispassion? Because you're too busy being happy and being fulfilled. And happy and fulfilled people don't say, oh, I don't know what to do. They're like, you know what? I'm great. I'm happy. So to respond to your question is that I would empower them and find out ways of allowing them to feel happier in themselves. And sometimes it's very appropriate to reawaken the sense of being a doer. And saying, look, you do have choice. You do have free will. Even though ultimately you don't, relatively speaking, you have free will. You've got all these things you can do. Are you actually, and again, we need to be truthful and genuine. There's a word I'm trying to think of that I can't quite find, but it's about being authentic. That's the word I was looking for. You authentically want to have a conversation with someone, and they can discover something in themselves that works for them. And I help people do that. What do they want to do? For example, you're hosting this wonderful podcast. Presumably that's something you want to do. Let's say it is something you really love to do. Then this gives you a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. And your spiritual journey, let's say, I'm not talking about you personally, but one's spiritual journey will evolve through the ventures they undertake. They will learn in these ventures, and they will learn with a teacher. And whereas what can happen is if we're attuned the mind and we start to see through the sense of being an individual, and we start to see through the sense of being a doer, we start to say, well, there's no one here. There's no person here. Then what's the effing point of any of this stuff? None of this is. And then if we add in nothing's real, then it's like, then you just feel, see what's happened is that you still actually feel like a person. You see, this is the problem. You still actually feel like a person, but intellectually you've said there's no person. But actually what's happened is you're a person who has started to see through the person, but still feels like they're a person, and now you're a bit depressed and you don't know what to do. So the genuine realization hasn't arisen, and now you're kind of like in this place. You've got an ideology that you've partially seen the truth of, which is there's no one here, but you also feel like, well, what do I do in this life? There's no connection with the divine necessarily, or limited connection with the divine. The heart's not open, or if it is, it's not as open as it could be. There isn't that spontaneous fullness. Ananda, in Sanskrit, the word ananda, fullness, purna, fullness, is not there. And that purna, that ananda, that is what I mean by empowering. You see, the point of the teaching is ananda. Ananda is that everyone knows Sat. Everybody knows Chit. Everyone knows Sat. Sat means you exist. Sat means being or existence or truth, isness, reality. Yeah? Everyone knows they exist. Chit means consciousness or knowingness or awareness. Everyone feels that they're aware. Everyone knows they exist. Everyone feels a sense of knowledge or awareness or knowingness. Ananda is the point of the teaching. Ananda means end of suffering. It means fullness, bliss. It cannot actually be put into words in its pure form. But I call it, when you empower someone, you allow the ananda to shine from within. That's what I mean by empower, I'm talking about it in a very specific way, I guess.
How does one distinguish between a genuine glimpse of the self and a spiritual experience that still belongs to the mind?
Okay, well, to be a bit harsh here, to be blunt, all glimpses of the self that don't result in self-realization are actually the mind. Now, that doesn't mean we should ignore it. Many of these things are great gifts to us, but they're still all experiences that do not result in total cessation of suffering, total annihilation of duality. They are within Maya. Maya means not reality, it means illusion, that which actually doesn't exist, that which is not true. But these are gifts to us within Maya, within our experiences, because all these experiences are for the person, for the individual, or in Sanskrit, for the jiva, or the person. Jiva means individual or person in this context. So anything for the jiva, anything for the individual is Maya. See, liberation is not for the jiva. Does that answer the question? Or
yeah,
tell me if it doesn't. I'm happy to.
No, it did. It did.
So again, it doesn't mean they're worthless. These are often gifts to us.
Yeah.
I guess the other part of your question is, what do we do with those things? Well, we have to, as if you're a seeker, you just have to do your best with what you have, don't you? That's a part of being a seeker. You try and do the best you can with it. And if you resonate with someone like me, come and talk to me about it. This is what I do. I help people through these things. This is what I've been doing. This is what I do. If you resonate with me, then come talk to me about it, and then we'll figure it out together.
Yeah, beautifully explained. I appreciate your harshness and your authenticity on explaining this, because it is something that a lot of the viewers, they experience. They come in the comment section, they say that, oh, I had this experience, I had that experience, but it does make sense that any of these experiences that isn't actually bringing you to the end of your suffering, it is an experience of the mind. And I do agree with that. And thank you for explaining it that way. Many seekers, they report a falling back into identifications after moments of clarity. I wanted to ask you, why, according to you, why does the veil of illusion come back? And how should we come back to the truth?
Great question. It's actually the same question again. You see, when the veil disappears, the veil is it. We can call it ignorance or illusion or duality or ego. The There are lots of different words to describe this veil. Once this veil disappears and we understand, or we see, we realize what we truly are. By the way, none of these words are correct. It's not a realization. It's not a seeing. We just don't have any words to describe what it is. So we just use these words. Once that happens, there is no falling back. Yeah. So once you see the self, and again, I'm going to use words that imply time and process. I mean, there isn't actually ultimately any time or process in this. When you see the self, the instant you see the self, duality and illusion and suffering disappears once and for all, forever. Never to return again. It's impossible for it to return. Because it doesn't, in that moment, it just completely evaporates. It never even arose it's actually seen, it never arose in the first place. And there is no snake. There's never been a snake. There never will be a snake. It's just the rope. To use the rope and snake analogy. So whenever we see the self, or we think we've seen the self, and then it comes back again, to be blunt, it just means you haven't actually seen the self. Now, it doesn't mean that you haven't had a genuinely profound experience. Yeah. You have had a genuinely profound experience, because you know that if you've had one of these awakening experiences, they are genuinely profound, or profound to the level that it's profound, But if you say, "Oh, I've seen," because the problem is, if you say I've seen the self, then what you try and do, you try and repeat it, you try and get back there again, but you're inevitably trying to get back something that is a memory, and B, not actually the self. And this causes, when you have a profound experience, and I've spoken to many people, hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 people, I don't know, about this stuff, probably over 1,000 people, I don't know. When you have a deep, profound awakening experience, it's almost impossible, perhaps it is impossible, for the mind not to want to repeat it again and again and again, especially when you first had it. Because it's like the first time a child eats ice cream, or tastes processed sugar. It's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And it will just want more. You can't help it. It's not the child. You're not blaming the child. It's just the way the brain works. You just want more. And when you have a deep, profound experience that is transformative and makes you see the world in a different way, or is something you've never experienced before, but it's very wonderful and beautiful, as long as it's positive, you want to experience it again. And it's very difficult for the mind not to want to just try and get there again and again and again. But almost certainly I'm saying, that is not the true self. True self is something is not the same as these experiences that people have, typically.
Yeah, no, beautifully explained. And I guess would you agree that it's very, very easily it's like a trap, that if you, after that so-called experience that you have had, that very easily you can fall into the trap of wanting it again, and that, would you say that brings you farther and farther from the truth?
It's ultimately, it's a trap. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, any desire to repeat a past experience is a trap. I'll just say that again. Any desire to repeat a past experience of pleasure, we typically don't want to repeat past experiences that are painful. So we're talking about positive, pleasurable experiences. But in the short or medium term, it can be useful to some seekers, because it may, talking about my own journey, I started to read a lot when I had this kind of experience. When I was 18, I had my first spiritual experience, and then I tried to repeat it for many years, and then I started reading lots of books. I started meditating more. It really ramped up my seeking. Now, initially it was amazing because for the first sort of 6 to 12 or 18 months after that, I was feeling really euphoric. And it gave me a sense of direction. I'd already been seeking for a few years before that. But that was the first time I realized, oh, this is true. Before that, it was like, I like reading this. This is fascinating to me. I want it to be true. But I didn't know if it was true. Maybe it was all a hoax or something. And then when I had this awakening experience when I was 18, I realized, oh my gosh, this stuff is true. And it made me feel great. It inspired me. It motivated me. But after a certain amount of time, I can't remember how long, it starts to cause a new form of suffering. Because like I couldn't quite get that experience back again. And then I started reading all these books and listening to these teachers as a new form of suffering. Because, that one doesn't make sense. This one doesn't make sense. So I understand that completely, but I'm still not feeling happier. Or, all these sorts of different form of suffering arises. So ultimately, these experiences can be very good in the short and medium term and in the long term. But ultimately, we have to forget them to progress. But in the short term, it might be very useful to try and chase something. And it's almost impossible not to.
First of all, thank you so much for giving your personal experience. It definitely helps the audience relate. I wanted to end the podcast by touching upon, and this is something that a lot of our viewers, when they come on the channel, they ask this question, that how can spiritual realization practically help in the daily problem that life throws at us? How can one realistically respond to these intense emotions like stress, grief, anxiety, or anger from a place of awareness when that situation arises?
Yeah. So as we come into contact with our true nature, which is the true self, or we can call it God, or we can call it, I call it Bhagawan, which means beloved, or means God. When we come into contact with Bhagawan, with ourself, everything in our life starts to flow better. We start to realize that we are being looked after, that there is a greater power that is guiding us. Eventually, we start to realize that greater power that is guiding us, that is actually us. When we're identified with the body mind, it's the greater power guiding us. As that power guides us more and more, we're able to let go more and more, because we start to realize that life's looking after us. We also start to realize that life is created by ourselves. We actually create our life. You see, that the things we experience are projections of our own consciousness. It's our own desire, our own intention that manifests this world around us. And this allows us to be even happier and let go more and more. And we start to realize everything around us is actually a manifestation of love and consciousness and our thoughts projected outwards. And then we can go, as we feel happier and have more faith in Bhagawan, in God, in these forces or this power, our attention goes away from things around us and comes more back to ourselves. And we naturally start our attention, this is the dispassion that arises naturally. And the dispassion starts to go inwards, and our attention, instead of flowing outwards towards Ferraris, and Ferrari is just my metaphor for anything you're looking for, any worldly thing you're looking for. And you start to feel happy inside, your attention starts to go inwards. And this is when we realize the self. And this is called self-inquiry. Is where our attention naturally, instead of our love to do things in the world and achieve things in the world and experience things in the world, which is the Rajasic mindset, the Rajasic is the outward, passionate mind. Our energy starts to flow inwards, and this is the yogic mindset. The energy, instead of going outwards, it goes inwards. It's the Vedanta teaching. Essential Vedanta teaching is about energy flowing not outwards but inwards. Shankara says it's like reversing a great current, the river is flowing outwards through the sense organs to the world, and we reverse this current through love, through devotion, through knowledge, through wisdom, and it comes back to ourselves. And yoga means coming together, becoming one, often translated as union. It just means coming together, being one, and the energy comes back to itself. But to answer your question, which was how does it help us in our life? Well, it helps us tremendously, because we start to see how everything's connected. We start to feel, instead of thinking we're this small body-mind entity in this vast world that, yes, has some good things for us, but also has some dangerous things for us, we start to see this as a divine play of love, which we actually have control over through our free will. This is why I say free will is important, because our intentions create the world around us. Now, ultimately, all this is false, but relatively, it's very useful. And if we cut that off too quickly, then people don't get a chance to realize this beauty in Maya that will actually lead us back home out of Maya. Because you're just cutting off that sense of individuality too quickly when at the wrong time. It's like, the Buddha had the analogy of the boat. He said his teachings are like a raft or a boat that takes you from the shore of ignorance to the shore of liberation. But we don't want to destroy this boat when we're only halfway across the river, And we can cut off our individuality too early if we're very conceptually minded, rather than allowing this individuality to take us back home, and there it dissolves. You see, does it make sense?
No, it really does make sense, and I'm truly grateful for this beautiful conversation, and it's such an insightful conversation that we're having right now. I can't wait to release this episode, Tom, and for the audience to relate to everything that you've said. Thank you so much for your time. Really means a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love the way you express yourself. You express yourself so beautifully.
Oh, thank you.